So hello everyone and welcome to this session for the Bristol Technology Festival. We're really delighted to have you here today. I can see there's 41 of you in the audience, which is great. And I know there's people still logging in. For any of you that don't know, I'm Ben Sharrock. I'm part of the organising team for BTF 2021. Bristol Technology Festival is all this week, and it's a festival that's brought together by a group of volunteers as a not-for-profit, and it's really about shouting about the amazing things that are happening here and encouraging people to connect and learn from one another. We want to do that to an audience within the community, within the region. So those people who already work in tech, but also people right throughout the city region who might not know that they can work in tech. And we want to reach audiences outside the city because, as I'm sure you all know, we're all terribly self-deprecating and don't talk about the amazing stuff that happens here enough. So that's the purpose of the festival. And I've no doubt you will all be here talking today and doing some exciting stuff. I'm very briefly going to run through a couple of things, and then I'm going to hand across to Chris, and then I'm going to hang around listening in the background because I'm really excited for this session. So just really basic stuff. I really want to say thanks to our partners. Bristol Tech Festival has a whole plethora of different partners. We have event partners like Bristol+BathLegalTech, we have community partners, and we have a charity partner. So our event partners are people who are putting on events right throughout this week. You're pretty much there for Monday now, but there's over 50 events throughout the week. So if you haven't checked Tuesday to Friday, please do so. There's a range of events that are both in person and virtual. Pretty much all of them are free. So check them out at bristoltechfest.org. Loads of amazing stuff that you can get involved in. We have a whole range of community partners, some of which you can see on this screen because I'm not doing it very well. But the community partners have all contributed to the festival, and genuinely without them, the festival wouldn't be happening this year. So if you are in the market to buy things, please do go and buy things from these community partners, because then they'll sponsor the festival again next year and we'll be able to run it and continue to grow. And the most important person you should buy things from is our headline sponsor, Softcat. Please do go and buy some cybersecurity software services from Softcat and get involved with them. And a final partner, and I think my favorite partner, is our charity partner, DigiLocal. So for any of you that don't know, DigiLocal is a not-for-profit run out of Bristol by an amazing guy, John. And they focus on supporting young people into learning about coding and the tech sector, particularly from diverse or deprived communities. John, I think, is currently working with 16 different schools and code clubs all across the region doing this. And we really want that to continue to happen. So if any of you are feeling generous, please do scan that QR code that's on your screen. It will take you through to an open banking platform provided by our awesome friends at MoneyHub using their platform, and will allow you to make a donation to DigiLocal. I would remind you that all of the events pretty much at the festival are free, so you're getting loads and loads of value out of loads of people. So please do pay that forward and give some money to DigiLocal. If you don't have time now, this QR code was going to appear repeatedly throughout the week, and I'm going to keep nagging people into giving some money. That's pretty much it from me. So I'm just going to hand over to Chris and leave you to it. I'll be in the chat if anyone wants to ask me any questions or chat about anything, or I think quite a lot of you know me anyway, so I'm not very hard to hunt down. But thanks. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers, Ben. A fantastic festival. Great lineup again this year, and thanks for all you do on that. And yeah, please, everybody, feel free to ask Ben questions in the Q&A. You don't have to just limit it to all of our fantastic super panel. So here we are, Bristol Tech Festival, third year that we've had a specific legal tech strand to the festival. I think reflecting the growing importance and activity around legal tech in the region. We think it's been really important to have this part of the tech sector represented at each one of these fantastic annual events, and we've done some in person and we've done some virtual. I'm sure next one will be in person. This one's virtual, and one of the great benefits of having it virtual, there are benefits, I promise, is we can get a really diverse and interesting group of people together to speak to you all. So we've gone a bit mad this year. It's an Ask Me Anything, an AMA event, so very much open to all of you to pitch in with questions. Of course, we asked people before the event if they had any particular questions, including some of the panelists. So we've got a few things to kick off with, but you're very much hoping this will be audience generated and you'll have things you want to ask. Pop them in the Q&A and I'll pick them up as we go along. And we also went a bit mad with the panel. You know, usually you get 3 or 4 people, but we've gone for, what was that, 11? Actually, it's more than that, isn't it? It's 12. So we've got a bit mad with our panel. That's why it's a super panel. It's because it's so big and because the people are, frankly, so super. What I'm not going to do, I'm not going to hold up the event any longer by kind of going around and asking everybody to introduce themselves, or me introduce them, even worse. What I'm going to do is as part of the initial kind of icebreaker question, which we're going to talk about now to kick the event off. I'll ask everybody just as they respond to the question, just weave in a bit of a who I am, where I'm from. Very, very quickly. Now, one thing you're going to find about this event, and if I haven't warned the panelists already, this is the moment, is, of course, we've got a lot to get through, hopefully even more to get through when you start asking questions. So we will be trying to move quite quickly and have quite snappy answers. There are lots of people on this panel who could speak by themselves for the whole event, and it would still be fascinating. So the worst thing is we're only going to get little snapshots from all of them, but in another way, that will give us this amazing kind of kaleidoscope jigsaw of lots of different views from some very different perspectives. So it'll be short and snappy, but you'll hear a lot of very interesting points of view along the way. We're going to start with a question which I guess kind of sets the scene in a way. This event is very much, the whole festival and this legal tech event, very much about what next, looking forward. We use the phrase, is legal tech coming of age, in the title and the header. And we can't have an event like this without thinking a little bit about what's happened in the last 18 months or so and how that's changed things. So the first question, we're going to have a bit of an icebreaker, so everybody's going to get a chance to answer this question, whereas later on I'll select people based on the question. We won't hear from everybody every time, but we're going to hear from everybody on this intro question. And the question is for everybody on the panel: how big an accelerator in terms of the digitization of the legal sector do you think the pandemic has been, and what are the major impacts that you think have happened, and what are the major impacts been? And I've reassured everybody they don't need to answer that question essay style. They don't need to include all the major impacts that possibly they can think of, just things that they've seen from their particular vantage point in the marketplace. So how big an accelerator has the pandemic been on legal tech and digitization, and any particular things that you want to emphasize? And I did warn Dagmar that I was going to start with her, and it only seems fair as my co-chair of Bristol+BathLegalTech. So Dagmar, over to you, and then I will call out each person's name and they can come up next. And I'm not going to tell you who's coming second.
Excellent. Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm Dagmar Steffens. I'm Head of Innovation and Sector Development at something called the West of England Combined Authority, which is basically a regional government which has got a very defined constitutional brief to further certain areas of economic activity within the west of England, which is Bristol, Bath, South Gloucestershire, and North Somerset. So that's what I do. Sector development really is why I'm here today, because the question is LegalTech a sector that is discernible and growing within our region? We did a LegalTech report which came out earlier this year in April this year, which clearly identified ourselves, and some of you might have read the report, as an emerging LegalTech cluster. And I think, coming back to your question, I think LegalTech was on its way anyway before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has definitely accelerated it and catapulted it onto the radar of regional government as something they want to become involved in supporting and fostering growth with the aim of enhancing productivity of the legal services industry and synergistic sectors, and leading to higher growth and therefore lots of benefits for the region. Another thing it's done, I think, also is to focus legal services innovation very much on the tech, and that might not always be a good thing. Would be my opinion, because legal services innovation is more than tech, and that must not be left behind in the whole thing.
Fantastic, thanks, Dagmar. Julia Salaski, I think we'll turn to you next.
I'm glad not to have any warning. It's always keeps one on one's toes. In terms, I'm Julia Salaski. I'm the CEO of a company called Legal. In terms of the impact of the pandemic, I think I would agree with Dagmar that change had already accelerated pre-pandemic. I think the trends of one of the awards that we went to, I think in 2019, like every single category started with innovation and technology, even though it wasn't a technology-based awards setting. So I think the winds of change were there. What we have seen, we work with about 150 law firms. So what we see across that is a really big increase in investment in client experience. And I think if from a downstream effect of the pandemic, you think about the experience of interacting with your lawyer has changed quite significantly from going into the office, which is a lot of people's experience, especially on the consumer level. We also see a lot more investment in like both. This sounds super obvious, but I think a lot of the impact is super obvious. A lot of investment in things that reduce the need to use paper-based systems, use people-based systems when people are face-to-face. To also in the context of being able to understand data better, because a lot of the human interaction piece is now much easier to understand actually when you see different types of user journeys in the technical language, but actually just the way your client interacts with the law firm is much more in the spotlight. So those are some of the trends that we've seen. And I think if you think about cost savings and cost efficiency, there's been a lot of gains, but then there's been also a lot of opportunity to reassess sort of how people spend money, whether that's on people, whether that's on paper. I think I heard a stat the other day about like reduction in just like paper costs. So there's a lot of like downstream effects that I think are both predictable and also somewhat surprising, and we'll continue to see that as people get used to working in different ways and as clients get used to experiencing and consuming legal services in different ways.
Brilliant. Thanks, Julia. Absolute pleasure to have you on this. I think your first Bristol and Bath LegalTech event, and proving the point, it's very hard to stop on this question. So and you didn't go on too long at all, but it's really difficult, isn't it? And I'm sure my next speaker will equally find it difficult. So Professor Sarah Green, I think it might be good to come to you and give us a different angle on this.
Okay, I'm not sure how different it's going to be, Chris, but I'll certainly tell you what I think. My name's Sarah Green, and I'm the Commissioner for Commercial and Common Law at the Law Commission of England and Wales, and most of my projects at the moment are concerned with emerging tech and the implications of those for law reform. So this is something that I've thought about a lot and talked about a lot certainly to Chris and probably to other people on this call as well. And I think in terms of the pandemic, it's been something of a perfect storm really for legal tech and for tech development generally, partly because of the technology that was starting to be more widely known and more widely used just before the pandemic. So I'm thinking about specifically distributed ledger technology and those technologies related technologies which enable us to do things electronically, remotely and virtually, which we couldn't really do before, at least not in the sort of secure way that we would want to. Of course, all of that brings with it risks. And generally, I think it's not just lawyers, but for obvious reasons, commercial organisations are generally fairly reluctant to take on the risk of the unknown and to embrace the risk of the unknown. And so the reason I say it's a perfect storm is because I think the pandemic forced everybody to take those risks and to do things remotely and virtually, which they didn't really have much choice about. And they have now learned that actually those risks are not as scary. They might be unfamiliar, but they're not as scary, and they're not necessarily worse risks than what was associated naturally with what we did before. So that's my view on what the pandemic has done. And I'm also absolutely determined that we're going to get some positives out of the last 18 months and to take something out of what we've all been through that makes the next sort of short to medium term a lot better and a lot easier. So that's my view. I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Sarah. I love that final comment as well. I'm sure we'll come back to that. You know, what can we absolutely ensure we get that's positive from this experience? I'm going to turn to Dave Bloor now. Dave, good to see you.
Good to see you, Chris. Thank you. So my name is Dave Bloor. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Fortansti LLP. To answer the question, much good stuff would have been said, so well done, everybody. I think if I add a different lens to that than what I would have, echoing some of the other people's comments, it would be that I think the biggest thing I've seen is the change fears that have been overcome ties into what Sarah was saying about the risk side of things, what Julie was saying about the experience that we offer people, but actually breaking through that with the perfect storm of the pandemic, with everything else. Actually, what it's doing is it's allowing very different conversations to happen. It's allowing people to be far more curious. And what I'm seeing is, you know, we have a big focus on adoption of technology. We've created a digital skills academy that considers our digital literacy because there is a bigger appetite than ever to be able to feel more confident, more competent, and more curious using technology, and actually how we support clients and how we help clients really move their own businesses forward and solve their own businesses challenges whilst we are supporting them on legal transactions. So that's the biggest thing that sort of, I think, outside of what everyone else has said, something a bit different there, which has been really interesting. And I don't see that slowing down. The curiosity is there. We're seeing more and more demand for, you know, our technology team to engage with clients directly on solving part of the relationship. And that's fantastic to see, because it feels like as a law firm, we're starting to really balance the tables on the value of technology skills in client conversations than just a support function that keeps things ticking over.
Thank you, Dave. And I'm sure we're going to come back to some of those themes, digital skills and literacy in particular, in a little while. Antonia James, I think I'll come to you next.
Hi there, Chris. I'm the Director of Client Relations at VWV, but I'm also founding director of VWV Plus, a subsidiary of the LLP, which helps to facilitate online tools and enable an element of self-serve for our clients, all of which is backed by our leading lawyers. In terms of your question, echo what Dave just said, you know, lots of good suggestions. I think for me, I think it's undoubtedly been an accelerator, but I think the degree of change very much varies depending on the nature of the legal services being provided and the clients that are procuring them. For example, you know, from practical things, some firms are already embracing VC or working in a hybrid way. But moving on, for me, perhaps the more interesting part is the impact that that's had. And I think I just highlight two things, one external facing and one internal. Externally, I think there's been far more dialogue and conversation for use cases for legal tech than there ever was before. And that in itself, I think, lends to greater investment and collaboration. There's definitely lots more conversation. And the second one, more of an internal perspective and probably a bit more selfish for my role, is it's a far easier conversation to influence and persuade others to invest in and or consider alternative ways of driving value. So whether that's operational efficiency or client service delivery, that there's much more of an appetite to pursue those options.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Antonio. Really, really interesting perspective on that last point about willingness to invest and the change in the amount of conversation and dialogue. I'm sure we'll hear some of the people echo that from different perspectives. We're very, very fortunate to have Joanna Goodman with us today. Joanna's actually helped out and joined one of our previous Bristol Technology Festival events, but obviously Joanna's a leading legal technology journalist. So Joanna, I'd love to hear your views on this.
Well, thank you, Chris, and lovely to work with you again. It's been about 18 months since we worked together, and Dagmar too. So we met at an event in Bristol and instantly clicked. So I'm a journalist, I'm a technology journalist. I'm the IT columnist for Law Society Gazette, so I write about legal tech every month. And I'm also write about emerging tech for other media and companies. So I kind of cross that divide of what's emerging tech and what's happening in legal. And I had the privilege to work on 2 big independent legal tech reports this year. One for Oxford University Business School for the SRA, and one for LawTech UK for Tech Nation. So that's quite unusual to have somebody who's worked on 2 and knows what's in both of them. And interestingly, it's very similar, which is also a bit worrying, but hey. So the pandemic, the first thing is, well, the first thing is great, okay? So I'm going to be really positive. I'm going to say everybody said law firms are slow to change and they are not agile and so on and so forth. But they switched to remote pretty much overnight and did an awesome job of it. So they can change. They proved it. The thing I would also pick up in agreement of what people have said is I will pick up Julia's thing on paper and say now they're going back to hybrid. They're going to also have to think a little bit about their offices, because law firms talked about being more paperless for probably as long as I've been covering legal tech, which is 10 years. And but because they were at home, you never print anything. So all of a sudden they are being paperless. So they save loads of paper, and they also have an opportunity to save lots of money on real estate, on how much office do you really need. So that goes 2 ways. You've got they've actually been convinced that tech works by Zoom and by e-signatures and by things that have enabled them to work remotely, effectively. And they've actually had to try some of the things that have been sitting there, like, stuff that's been around forever, like deal rooms. Instead of sort of getting someone else to do it, the partners have had to actually use the deal rooms for their closings and do things that impact directly on the money that they make. So that's the very cool stuff. Now they're going hybrid, then that's also quite good, because if you take the other side of legal, if you take the development side of, not legal, of tech, the development side of tech and innovation, maybe innovation has suffered a little because firms have needed to keep the lights on. They've needed to keep everybody online, and and there's less of that connection, that in-person connection where you can bounce ideas off of each other, a creativity. I mean, I was at Legal Geek and I met Tom there, actually, who's here today. And just straight away when we were sitting around the table, people came up with ideas and thoughts and things of how exciting ways of doing things. So I think that in person again is going to sort of bring stuff up that hasn't. And something I sort of did a bit of research on for my talk was there is a competition challenge So that's something where you actually don't know where the challenge is coming from. So this is the last thing I'm going to say, because I can go on, and is that, you know, in the pandemic, people went for everything being delivered on online shopping and everything. And Deliveroo has the dark kitchens that never existed before, where they just have the stuff there and it's only for delivery. There's no restaurant. I discovered that when I went with a friend to look for these ice cream mochi that he sent for on Deliveroo, and then it was all shut. So we were sad because we had no ice cream. And we're like, dark kitchen. Could there be dark law firms? Do they actually need an office? You can talk to someone on this. So you still have your person, you still have your conversation, you still have your service, you still have your connection, but you don't have your office. So, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and I reckon invention will be coming back for 2022.
Thanks, Joanna. That was brilliant, and thanks particularly. It was worth every minute for dark law firms. That's one we're going to hear more about, I'm sure. And you gave a nice cue to the next speaker. So let's hear from Tom Bartley. All of us.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, well, I mean, lots of echoing before, and Dave definitely took my adoption point that I was going to make, because what we've definitely seen prior to 2020 wasn't an acceleration of engagement with legal tech and the technologies, but you've got this problem of the senior partners and the associates who are too busy to think about this thing and can't possibly conceive of change, suddenly are in this world where change is not only possible but necessary. And so you've definitely got this much more openness, I think, across the board, rather than just innovation teams and tech teams engaging with the conversation. It's a much more open discussion, it seems, that are around law firms generally about how do we improve the way that we do legal services. I'm going to try and find a negative thing, and I think the negative thing as a vendor, I'm Tom, I'm co-founder of Bartley. We're a collaborative document drafting tool focusing on knowledge. I would say that the information security aspects of adopting technology is something that doesn't seem to have progressed in the time that we've certainly been working in the sector, and that is perhaps a bottleneck in the process. And so whilst the adoption of approved technologies are very definitely accelerating, bringing new capabilities and new technologies to firms and therefore to the clients is something that I think should be addressed next in the information security, and being maybe more standardized and more agile with the way that information security requirements are managed.
Thanks, Tom, and well done for remembering to say who you were and where you were from. It's interesting that your negative is almost, and I think you said information security hasn't really progressed, and maybe there's just even a bit of hint of it's maybe gone backwards in context to everything else. Very, very interesting point. I have heard that made by other people. We're going to stay on kind of supply side if we can, because this is a tech festival event. It's always important to hear from tech businesses. Will Wood from DataSharp. Will, it'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, as you say, I'm Will from DataSharp. I'm a director here. Been here for 20 years as of next month, which is always still shocks me. And it's lovely to hear everybody else's inputs on that. As you say, Tom, Dave's point about adoption, Joanna's point about law firms can move quickly. And I think the interesting part there is that they had to move quickly. It was kind of, the pandemic forced it upon people. And I know, if I take a couple of very sort of distinct points, so as not to be too general, as soon as the pandemic hit, we were inundated with people saying, we haven't quite done our thing as quickly as we'd hoped, and how quickly can you enable VoIP so that people can work from home, and how can you provide the technologies to enable that? Interestingly, now where we're at with the return to work side of things, we're seeing other end of the pandemic. We live in hope, right? Challenges around people now have heavily adopted video communications. We're all living proof of that today. I don't know about you guys, but where probably 1 in 10 conversations pre-pandemic was on video. Now it's the other way around. I'm thinking 8 to 9 is on video, and then occasionally I'll pick up my mobile and make a call. People now coming back into the office have got this challenge of, is the office ready to be able to do everything I'm used to being able to do at home? So the big one I'm pointing at there is video. If you walk back into a room and that room is a Zoom room or a Teams room or a Starleaf room or a Polycom room or whatever kit you've got in there, and then somebody invites you, let's say the courts say you need to come and join their video conference service, which is on a completely different and unsupportable platform as to the kit that you've got in the room, you've got a big challenge ahead of you there. So that's one of my sort of real specific things here, is that people have taken on a lot of technology and a lot of changes in their working practices in the legal world, and incredibly fast and incredibly well, I have to say as well. I know I've spoken to a good number of CIOs, CTOs, and they've said, I've never seen the adoption work so well and so fast in throwing out a new platform across the business, because everyone had to do it, so there was no complaining. So, you know, some great projects were carried out very, very fast. But yeah, coming back into the office now is the kind of reverse challenge. You know, what's changed over those times that now the office doesn't support? And yeah, that seems to be something that's taking up an awful lot of our time right now. You know, Teams is a wonderful platform, but it is a bit closed in places. So how do you enable that out, right? But yeah, so that would be my point.
Thanks very much, Will. Really interesting, that question about the complexity of the challenge we now face compared to the sort of existential simplicity of the challenge that people faced back in March, April last year, which is get out of the office and remote work. Now with a lot more factors, it seems. I'm going to turn to Sean. I think Sean Ashton. Hello, Sean.
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Ashton. I'm Client Service Transformation Partner at TLT. It's really interesting, something coming in towards the end of the panel responses, because everyone's stolen your thunder about pretty much everything. Definitely, we're seeing a lot more adoption, or at least the desire for adoption. And I think that sort of acceleration of digitization is definitely there because of what everyone's gone through. What's quite interesting, sort of following on from Will's point then, is one of the challenges that comes is actually whether people are starting to get change fatigue, and they've gone through so much in such a short period of time, that how do you keep that momentum going? And so you've got the sort of people who are really interested about new pieces of legal tech, or going back to Dagmar's original point, new ways of doing things. But how do you make sure that they keep going that way? And as they move back into the office, that the bad habits or the old ways don't start creeping back in. And suddenly these people who on day one of the pandemic were like, teach me how to use DocuSign, aren't going back to signing things with a quill and sort of ink, because it's comforting and nice. And so I think that's an interesting challenge that's now existing, and certainly one that we're not seeing masses of, but I can see that it will happen more as people become more sort of more resigned to sort of being back in the office. And so it's just about keeping enthusiasm up. And I've got a visitor who comes in just as I'm talking, which is always the way, isn't it? The other point I wanted to pick up on was Tom's about InfoSec. And it's interesting because I think what we're seeing is a lot of the adoption that I'm seeing, certainly in terms of clients, is coming in relation to clients wanting more technology or clients wanting more innovation. But then at the same time, they give with one hand and then take away with the other, because they're saying, I want more InfoSec. I want you to do all these things. And particularly with sort of financial services clients and public sector, their demands massively outweigh the benefits that they're necessarily going to get. And I think that's a sort of a conundrum to consider. And I'll pass over now. Probably talked for long enough, and there's a risk of small people involving themselves.
You handled that very well, Sean. That's not the first time that's happened, is it?
It is not.
But you didn't have the joy that I sometimes get of the person then stood in the corner of the room going, oh, blah, blah, blah. So well done for carrying on throughout that. Let's see what we can throw at Ben Holt.
Hello. I've got my dog who's currently asleep at my feet, so I might trump you with a big woofing dog, Sean. Hello, I'm Ben Holt. I'm a litigation partner at VWV, but I'm here today in my role as president of Bristol Law Society. Obviously, flexible working and increased use of remote technology, but I think that's probably led to a lot of us discussing issues around the risks associated with that, with learning by osmosis, particularly for junior lawyers, and the ability to manage a team and also know what's going on generally, and of course creating a team atmosphere, and that obviously sits alongside issues like well-being. I don't think we've come up with a digital solution to that yet, and I suspect it will just end up being that we all go back to the office more, and that might well be the right way forward, but as I said, I haven't seen any digital solutions to that, and I think the novelty of online social events is perhaps wearing a bit thin, and enthusiasm's waning. I stress social rather than educational, like this, of course, Chris, on message. It feels like we've had an increased visibility of lawyers discussing coding and having a better understanding of cryptocurrencies, which has certainly accelerated. ID authentication, obvious change that's immediately impacted probably the largest part of the sector. And I think clients have embraced that well. And whilst we try and catch up with the finance and banking sector with their tech on that, the court has been very quick to adopt PDF digital bundles, and that of course saves time and the use of paper. And as Joe picked up earlier, I think from a personal perspective, I'm pretty much now working paper free. I used to go into our London office where people had 2 screens and thought they were all being a bit fancy Dan, but now I've got 3, and turns out you don't need paper at all. The court's also been using a lot of online platforms to host hearings. I think that'll stay, certainly for administrative hearings, and that's impacting on freeing up lawyers' time, but also saving on travel, and therefore a knock-on effect on emissions, which is great. I think before these things were all spoken about, but not particularly seen as anything that needed immediate attention, probably because the current processes did the job well enough. So I think more is needed, and there's clearly great benefits, not just in terms of profitability, but also for key issues like access to justice and like equality, diversity and inclusion. So in short, I think there's been some acceleration. I'd like to think that it would have happened anyway, but perhaps at a slightly slower pace. So maybe the enforced changes caused by the pandemic have encouraged that.
Wow, thank you. Tour de force, Ben. I think that was the most amount of points in one of these sessions that anybody's managed so far. Congratulations. Exactly what I'd expect from the president of Bristol Law Society. And thank you to Bristol Law Society in particular, by the way. I think we say every event for the huge amount of support they've given to Bristol and Bath LegalTech over the last few years. It's been great working with everybody there. We only have 2 more speakers to come to, and Kathleen O'Reilly, you're not the last speaker, you're the penultimate person, so I would love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. Always nice to be penultimate. So I'll just tell you a bit about myself, because I don't think I know that many of you here. I'm Kathleen O'Reilly. I'm the head of law for BPP University in the Southwest. So we're based in that wonderful location, Queen Square in Bristol. And as head of law, I'm responsible for the running of the law school in Bristol. So our programs, law conversion, solicitor training courses and barrister training courses. We also have legal apprenticeships, which have been operating for a while now and have been a real success story for us in Bristol. So very, very excited about those. I'm responsible for student experience as well. And one of the things that I'd say, which I think Joanna and Ben also was touching upon this as well, is we've been back in the classroom since the beginning of September, and students are so pleased to be back in the classroom, collaborating, exchanging ideas, working in a team. It's been wonderful. What I would add is that we haven't for a long time at BPP had a traditional classroom-based scenario. So we haven't had lectures and then tutorials. What happens is the students are expected to do a lot of work before they come into the classroom, before they come into a workshop. So they look at the lectures, they look at the text, etc. They carry out activities, and then the classroom is all about the virtual practice environment, given case studies and clients, and then advising those clients, and trying to, as much as one can when it's that mix of academic and vocational and practical, trying to get them used to what kind of things would come up in practice. As part of that, we've introduced digital document delivery into the classroom now, which is great because it means I don't have to carry lots of pieces of paper and hand them all out in class. And so that's the students have really taken to that. So effectively, whilst I'm in the classroom, they get an email from their supervisor, and then they have to work in their group on that email. So it's really, really good for giving that practice feel. And then I suppose the other impact, in terms of what we do at BPP, we've always been very interested in legal tech, and it's part of our LPC offering. I keep talking about LPC as was, which of course it is still around for quite a while yet, but we are looking to that post SQE world. And for those law firms that are looking for something more than the SRA requirements, and we're in discussions with law firms who are, the digital world and legal tech is going to be very much front and center of what we're offering to those firms, because it's just so important that lawyers are ready for the future. That's all I'm going to say, Chris.
Thank you, Kathleen. That was well worth waiting for, as will be this final contribution. I'm sure he's rolling his eyes that I've left him till last. My partner in crime from preparing a lot of the legal tech report we produced earlier this year, Stuart Harris.
Thanks, Chris. What was the question again? Hi, everyone.
I'm going to repeat it for you. I know you were paying attention.
Stuart Harrison. I don't know how I'm going to follow everyone here with anything unique whatsoever, but I'll see what I come up with. I'm probably best known for running FinTech West, but I generally have a technology background. As Chris alluded to, I was, are we allowed to say partner in crime in these circles? I don't know, but I was co-author of the Bristol+BathLegalTech ecosystem report, which was great fun working with Chris. And that was done, it seems like so long ago, but it was only earlier this year. I would have guessed like 2 years, but that was obviously in the heart of lockdown. And I think what I saw, and the report does cover a lot of the impact of COVID. What I saw it was a pretty significant accelerator. It's not going to be any surprise there. And I think accelerator is the right phrase as well, because it's not as if many of the law firms were doing something completely different. It was more accelerating plans that are already in place, which there was a fantastic feedback on how well the law firms had coped with the transition very quickly, and the transition being both the new technology and new, if you like, infrastructure platforms around cloud and integrated communications and so on. So I think it was a very transitional time, but it's not like a tide. It's not like it's came into the beach and it's going to go away again. It's here to stay. How much further and how quick we can take things will remain to see. But while everyone was talking, I took the advantage to dig up a quote that someone said to me in one of the interviews I did, which stuck with me, and I couldn't quite remember it. So I've dug that out. And that was a partner of a law firm who actually said, I've seen more of the clients in the last 6 months than I ever did previously, but via Zoom. And the efficiency of running our business has been greatly improved. We will ultimately go back in the office, but work practices will have changed for good. So rather than me come up with anything unique, I'll quote one of my previous interviews.
Fantastic, and well done on finding that quote, Stuart. I'm very impressed. Thank you for that, and really important part of think what we're thinking about in legal tech as an industry, and certainly this has become a big theme in the west of England, is how legal tech and fintech work together, and what legal tech, I guess, as a smaller subsector at the moment, certainly can learn from fintech and its development, and I suspect we might come back to that if we have time as well. I'm just going to move to another question. So I've got a question here from, let's go for Richard Lowe's question, and it's about how people are finding tech automation, AI, machine learning is changing the way lawyers complete their work, and what that means for lawyers' skills. So I think it's kind of an ideal question for lawyers, and we've got a few, and for people who work very closely with lawyers. So I'm not going to post that to everybody, but what's the development in technology actually been doing to lawyers' skills? One for Sean, I think I'd love to hear from Sean Ashton on that, and then from Ben Holt, and then from Dave Blore, if we could. Sean, what do you think about that?
It's an interesting question and I think it's one that goes to this worry that people have about what happens to training contracts and trainees and sort of the junior resource when you effectively can take out a swathe of that legal profession by just automating things. All that kind of commoditizable, repeatable work that is often done by junior fee earners can be very quickly taken out of the mix by using technology. And then how do those junior fee earners become senior fee earners because they didn't do the kind of the grunt work that certainly I know Ben and I will have had to do as trainees, and hours in cupboards looking at documents, sticking post-its on them, and suddenly you can do it with technology. And I think, though, that assumes that people can't learn in different ways. This is actually about being able to give them a greater skill set quicker. You know, you can sort of get them involved in more complex stuff. You can get them involved in negotiations. You can get them involved in the harder stuff that maybe before you just never could because they had to be working on those documents and sitting in a cupboard with post-it notes. I think we need to trust our juniors and believe in the intelligence that they're obviously bringing to the industry.
Ben, what do you think? I mean, is it genuine, this change in lawyer behaviour and the model of how legal teams work?
I think it will be. I don't think we're there yet. I think picking up on Sean's point, I mean, it's been a thing that I've certainly been discussing with our local education providers, the universities, in terms of what is the future lawyer going to look like. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily Sean and I, who apparently tied with the same brush from being quite old now, but in terms of what people are going to look like in a while, we've been talking about, you know, to maybe use a US phrase, sort of majoring in law but doing modules in technology, you know, and there are lawyers who are now teaching themselves to code. The ability to do that, I think we need to embrace it as a profession alongside our tech provider friends, but we need to keep it within our sphere to be able to continue to provide the service. I mean, there's lots of service that are clearly going to go digital fairly quickly, and if we don't pick up on that, we may well lose out at some ends of the market. It will take a while, I think, for things like litigation to go fully tech based. I think that's many years down the line, but lots of services can be commoditized more easily. So I think let's embrace it. Let's get our junior lawyers to be the people who are going to be doing it, and as Sean said, sort of upskill them.
Dave Blore, you talked about you mentioned your Digital Skills Academy and digital literacy earlier on as a big theme for ANSTI. How's that been going, and how has that reflected kind of genuine demand and change amongst your lawyers?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I could talk about this for hours, so I'll try and summarize it. What's really interesting here is what we put on the spectrum as AI. In reality, I think there is basic machine learning, robotic process automation, which is being well understood as use cases, and lawyers are becoming far more comfortable with that in terms of them helping them how they understand how they automate more routine work, so processing bills more automatically and other such things. Where we have used other more pure AI-based technology, there is that resistance, as Sean called out, around actually how if I don't have my trainees cutting their teeth on an NDA because we're putting it through AI, where do they get those skills? And what that's led to is actually a bit of a piece that over time it will lead to for us, say, how are we using our data, how are we collecting our information, our documents, how are we making that available via data to surface back as knowledge in a far more organic way to support that learning piece. Now, that's a longer term thing we're going to look at. In the shorter term, and the Digital Skills Academy, what we're doing now is putting, just started this year, we're putting our new trainees through a sort of core technology skills set of modules. So we'll give them 6 sessions covering different areas, and then they'll be objectified really over the course of their training period to with the areas they're working within, come to our innovation sort of area and say, we want to change the way that this works. We think we can use technology to improve the way that we find information, or we process the work that's coming through. And that for me is sort of it's a longer term strategy, but it can start now. So no better place to start with the trainees. And then what we're doing is we're finding there's certain modules we've created within our Digital Skills Academy which are more beneficial to certain practice areas, but there's been really good uptake on design thinking concepts for understanding clients' problems and being curious, and how that flows through into the digital conversation. So we've seen a lot of uptake in it, and I think if you take some of the sort of the tools that you use to facilitate good technology solutions, actually they're really valuable to lawyers in their day-to-day conversations in understanding the broader business problem. Combine that with then, we over the last year recruited 3 legal engineers who are all students who have finished their law degrees but fell in love with tech, and give them the opportunity to grow and be in that client conversation. I can start to see whether areas where the magic will happen, and it won't be that far away. I'd like to see that universities start introducing more of this as well in the education path of lawyers, because they don't need to look in libraries anymore, in books anymore, to find out information. Actually, how do we bring that to life? And the last thing on this I'll say is that we launched a chatbot this over the last 18 months. It was for technology support, but I was told that nobody will ever use a chatbot to get support or to get information. And the uptake and people just seeing how that has been used and how valuable it's been, all of a sudden now we sort of got our knowledge area saying, could we have a chatbot for X, Y, and Z? And our HR team saying, actually be really helpful to lawyers to see certain information in a certain way. Could we do that? So just, I think by seeding this and bringing it through in different ways, and not having a big bang approach to it, but being patient with it is just the best way to go. But I think we're still at the early days of process automation than pure AI and using, and digitizing everything that we collect and produce throughout the legal profession. I'll stop there, Chris, because I've gone further.
Thanks, Dave. Dave, you give a bit of a cue to universities there, and I'm going to ask Kathleen just to give us a bit of a view, which also relates to a question that Julia asked Kathleen on the Q&A on the chat, which is how much interest there is and how much change there is amongst students before they come through to you as trainees in terms of tech and all of the application of tech within law. So Kathleen, just give us a quick view of how that's changing.
I suppose what we're seeing is that the students that we have, they have all chosen law already, but they're really keen to see how technology can assist them in their roles. They're also, I think, quite excited about not having to do some of that sort of, difficult drudge work that we all went through. To be able to actually get really involved in either a case or a corporate matter, they're very excited about that, and that's what they want to do. So they're really interested in it. Like I said, we don't particularly have students who then want to become legal engineers with us as such. We do have a very thriving School of Technology, and we do have, you know, we have conversations with them. So we are making sure that the students that we produce, as it were, it's not quite the term I wanted to use, but the students that leave us are really enthusiastic about technology and what it can offer. Because, yeah, as we've seen in this last year, it's brought us so many benefits. When I first started at BPP, which was actually in lockdown, I was having conversations with my boss, and she was saying, we need people to be in the office as soon as we can. Once, you know, we thought at the time that COVID would be over quite quick. You know, there was vague suggestions it might be over quite quickly, which obviously didn't happen. But one of the other factors that we've seen is how much employees have been trustworthy working from home, and how employers can see what significant benefits they have from allowing that hybrid model. So so we're finding that our students are quite excited about that hybrid model and the flexibility.
Thanks, Kathleen. That's fantastic. I'm going to move on to another question. Some of these questions are extremely erudite and well thought through, and some of them are just really simple and effective. So Ben Bennett, who I can always rely on to come up with some great questions. I love this question. I'm going to have to ask it. Bennett asks, who has been more surprised by the increased adoption of legal tech? The tech companies or the lawyers? And ladies and gentlemen, we're about to find out. So I'm going to ask, how surprised have you been? And I'm going to ask Julia, and then Will, and then Tom to comment on how surprised you've been by the greater adoption of legal tech. And then I'm going to ask Antonia for a view, I think, from the law firm point of view. Julia.
I love that question. So legal is my second legal tech venture. My first one I launched it about 6 years ago. So I guess I have both a complete love and desire for the legal industry to adopt technology, and also a deep skepticism of the adoption curve. And so I think I would say we saw a really strong uptake pre-COVID. And I think that was because we had identified like a genuine pain point. Post-COVID, we saw increased acceleration, and I would say I was at the beginning. I mean, I don't know whether to take this question on face value or if it's just a cheeky question, but I wrote at the beginning of the pandemic like a long kind of internal memo about worst case scenarios with like all sorts of branching logic basically around if this then that, if this then that. And we just threw it out after a month because we just saw the curve go up. So I was surprised, but it's that balance of like desire for things to change with healthy skepticism that sometimes people are slow to adopt.
Cool. Me? You want me now? I'll go. Thank you. So am I more surprised than legal itself? I don't know. I would have to say that the thing that I feel has changed really fast is that the IT team within the business, you know, they moved very, very, very well in general across the board. There are certain parts that were very, very reactive though, and there were other parts that had to be more strategic. And the strategic elements of it obviously lent very heavily on the managing partners and this, you know, the CFOs and a much sort of longer game plan. I would say that, you know, in the comms world, Teams just took over the legal sector a little bit, right? So phone system and video conferencing, and it's been extremely good, you know, from that perspective. But the adoption of it, did it surprise us? I don't think it did. I think that it was always coming, and possibly the legal sector has been a little slower than other sectors to adopt and embrace some of those technologies, and it needed that shove in order to push it down that road. But ultimately, I'm gonna hang my hat on the it was a positive side product of everything that's been going on, right? So yeah, I'm going to go with not enormously surprised, but pleased to see it happen, because I think that ultimately the people that benefit out of it are the staff. That they can, agile working in law was being heavily preached and not necessarily adopted, and suddenly it was. So yeah, that would be my feedback.
Thanks, Will. And Tom.
Great, thanks, Chris. So I think just on Barbel's journey, and linking it back to the previous question, which was about the pandemic, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the pandemic in two sorts of sense of the word. So when Barbel was founded in 2018, we looked at the various sectors that we could be working at, and when we spoke to lawyers, it was a definite no, just no. There's no point coming and playing in this area. We're not going to be interested in what you're saying. And what happened for Barbel is that when 2020 came along and we were working with airports and big kind of transportation projects that suddenly just stopped, we had to think on our feet. And it was really that opportunity that came to us and said, well, actually, why don't we start looking at other sectors? And suddenly the dialogue had changed to not no, but maybe. And we certainly never set out with the intent of working with lawyers, or certainly not in the short term. But I think we are surprised to be here, and I think going back to my point previously, that the change was one of necessity, not a change of culture or whatever. So for lawyers, it was like we have to change, and then suddenly what comes is this bow wave of openness to new things as well. And so I don't know whether it's a surprise. I'm certainly surprised to be here. Or if you said to me 20 months ago that I'd be here, I'd be a bit skeptical. But there we are.
Very good. Antonia, from a law firm perspective, have you been surprised by the uptake of LegalTech and changes you've seen, particularly in the last 18 months?
It's a great question. I've just been thinking whilst the other guys were talking. I think from my perspective, 5 years ago was when I first tried to persuade a group of partners to invest in a subsidiary to collaborate with a software company to deliver services. Oh my goodness, we've come a long way since then. I spent a long time, big chunks of my life. Lawyers, without generalising, are naturally risk averse. And I think all of us, whether we're lawyers or not, over the last 18 months, 2 years even, have become much better able to say, I can't work the tech, this doesn't work, I don't know how to do that, could you explain it to me? So I think together we're all asking much better questions. And I think as much as the conversation earlier was about the future development of skills for our lawyers and our trainees in particular, actually I think everyone in the business has to be vested in the future skills that together we can bring. So certainly some of the products that I'm working on at the moment, the best ones are where we've got somebody with IT skills, somebody that does code, the legal subject matter experts, the BD and the marketing, the finance, the pricing champions. I don't think it's a surprise to me now that we're open-minded to embrace the new ways of working and look at the different tools. I think what we need to do as law firms is make sure we're not rushing to the solution. We need to just pause, as much as that might be exciting and that looks like it fits, identify the problem or the need, understand the value, and then go and appraise and take a journey towards the solution.
Very good, very, very interesting. A very quick addition, just a very quick thought, Dave Bloor from you. You've been in for Anstey 3 years, about that, and came from jobs outside of the legal sector. How different does it look today compared to how it looked after 4 or 5 months in?
Yeah, so I guess from my perspective, vastly different, and I mean that across the entire industry. I think the acceptance of better investing on operational hygiene tech seems to have gone through, particularly around the concerns of cyber as well in some of those areas. So that's an interesting aspect, and I think there's also a really big benefit that's come through because our clients are starting to ask more around tech-based services and tech-based engagement, that all of a sudden has really opened up the eyes from a client's perspective into our lawyers on actually they're asking these things. How do we understand them? How do we help solve their business problems? And actually I can only go so far as a lawyer in doing that before I need, like Antonio said, someone else to work with me to work out what the answer is. And it's brought a really, what I've seen is the biggest change is actually the collaboration that started to happen more in trying to answer problems, solve, and sort of solve challenges that are put forward there to come up with something that would work far better than if it had been a problem solved in isolation or siloing just a client conversation with a fee earner. So from that point of view, the not so much the adoption of tech, but the willingness to want to engage with and understand opportunities of digital solutions and digital legal services, that's been a fantastic change.
Excellent, thank you for that. I thought it was worth asking you for that perspective. I'm going to shift gears, try and clear up some more of these questions. We got a couple of questions from Lee Everson at Barclays. Totally switching the view, but let's get some views on this. None of us are going to claim to be experts on IPOs and investment, but I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask Joanna and Dagmar, particularly with a bit of a West of England hat on, and then Stuart Harrison, thinking about what's been happening in the fintech sector to have a go at thoughts on this one. So Lee says 3 recent US multi-million-dollar unicorn IPOs have happened in legal tech sector: Disco, Intap, LegalZoom. Many of you will know what they are, some of you won't. Do you see this acting to open up capital markets in the UK and Europe for more investment in legal tech? So it's all about how much more investment we see in legal tech, how attractive it is as a sector for investors. Joanna, what do you think about that?
Okay, can you hear me now? I'm muting myself. The thing is, there have been massive investments, and there's also been a huge lot of consolidation. We've seen a lot of M&A activity in legal tech, and that's got to be brought into the equation, because a lot of this equation is like, for example, Litera is buying everything. So we've got a lot of consolidation in the main thing. I mean, it's not everything, but it's bought a load of different things. It's bought something every 2 weeks. So there's a lot of money swirling around. But the thing with investors, and the people who are entrepreneurs here will know this a lot better than me. The thing with investors is they want a return. It's not free money. So in a sense, sometimes you find a massive investment distorts the market because it's a 3-year or 5-year cycle. And we have seen things go wrong, like was the Atrium, the US model, where they got, where Justin Can got so much money in from everybody, including Andreessen Horowitz and Silicon Valley and people like that. And then it went bust. So it's not, investment doesn't necessarily mean success. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have a lot of institutional interest in legal tech, which has accelerated since the pandemic. So I was working with LawTech UK, and they've just announced the new sandbox startups. So sometimes these things, accelerators and innovators from innovation things, from scale up things, from law firms, where they're trying to sort of invest in new ideas because innovation is not at their heart. So they're buying some. And so there's quite a lot of stuff going on there. I would say there is an interest because Europe sees the successes. I don't think Brexit helps investment from Europe in UK ones, but legal tech is quite global. And I met quite a few startups from different countries recently, and at Legal Geek, because it's a startup thing, and they still came over. So I think, yeah, but it may peak. You know, investors look at one thing or another, and they do want to return. And I've seen, I think there's an awful lot of choice as well, and which makes it quite compromising for procurement. So will all these startups actually sell their things into law firms? You know, what happens with the confusion of choice? And these things are new. So are they okay? Tom was talking about data security. Are they okay? Are they solid? Are they secure? Will they conform to regulations? So it brings in investment, but it also brings questions, in my short answer. I don't know a lot about the markets in Europe, so I can't really tell you about them, and I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what they're doing in legal tech.
That's really helpful, Joanna. I'll tell you what, I will come to Dagmar and Stuart in a second, but actually, Julia, it'd be really good to get your take following on from Joanna as an entrepreneur and an owner of two legal tech businesses. What's your view on this? Are we seeing this becoming a really hot sector?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So because the IPOs are all quite recent, but I would say the trend we're more at the venture end of the market, so not in the public markets, but at the venture end, there has been significant increased interest in legal tech. When I first launched my first legal tech business, legal tech wasn't a category at all. Now it's a defined category. Investment is flowing into this category. In our experience, it's coming from the US. So to your question about whether it's Europe, UK, I do think it's, I think the default for the liquidity at the venture stage of the capital markets is still very heavily biased to the US, but the trend is extremely positive. And I think over the last couple of weeks alone, there's been something like 500 or 600 million pounds of investment or dollars of investment into legal tech. So this is it's hotting up, and I would say it's definitely coming to Europe. It's always a little bit, Europe's always a few years behind the US in terms of investment, but the IPOs definitely help, and they help entrepreneurs tell a much more compelling story about exit. And so it's a great question. I think I think the trend is actually really strong.
Thank you. Dagmar, just wondering how you and the West of England Combined Authority see this from a regional point of view.
Yeah, that was going to be my first sentence. This is going to be the regional view, really. So we've got some experience with our partners like techSPARK, for example, of running scale-ups and investment activators in the region in order to attract investor interest in our very, very small businesses that are starting off. And that's really where my action is focused. In the innovation space to help SMEs and micro businesses to climb the greasy pole in a number of sectors, and legal tech is one of them. I certainly would like to think it's now a defined category, as Julia says. That might not necessarily be the case for the majority of UK investors in tech yet. I would say so I'm really interested in growing that and getting help from the community in growing that as well, and also give scale-up support to very small businesses who've got something going but simply don't know where to go next. That's really important, and it's very similar to our creative industries in this area, who are mainly micro businesses and for different reasons probably. What is interesting though is that it's a divide, isn't there? The law firms themselves are focusing on their clients and co-creating tech solutions for them, tailored tech solutions. And I just wonder whether in the future whether this will remain the same, that law firms simply have their own service companies that do this kind of stuff, or whether they're going to start outsourcing and putting more money into people with ideas and expertise. And maybe that is another source really to bring this forward. That's my thoughts.
Thank you. That sounds very positive from a regional point of view, and sort of partly from a regional point of view, but particularly seeing what we can learn and see from trends in fintech. Stuart, how have you seen this develop in terms of investment into fintech businesses?
Yeah, well, I was going to talk about legal tech businesses, but I was going to say there's clearly a lot of opportunity for investment into legal tech businesses. I mean, Tom's a perfect example there. Most of my experience comes from the small to the scale up or startup to scale up size businesses. But I think one aspect I would throw into the equation here is that in the dealings I've had with VC type businesses, you can talk to them about a sector like fintech that is, everyone wants a piece of fintech. And so you can just mention fintech and they'll probably be interested in a business that you're talking about. With legal tech, they don't have that sort of same criteria or desire at this stage. Could change. Certainly got the opportunity to change. I think one of the things I would say though from some of the businesses that I've seen is we've always got to remember that legal tech is a label we give the businesses. Not necessarily the businesses themselves don't necessarily give themselves that label. So I'm thinking of a company based in Bath called Shout4. They started out calling themselves a music tech business, but I quickly persuaded them that actually, no, you're really a legal tech business. And now they're developing their package. No, you're a fintech business as well. So they have a solution which can cover multiple angles, and therefore they can morph, if you like, their message according to the investor that's speaking to them or interested in them. So yeah, there's plenty of opportunity. I certainly would say from the larger investments I've been aware of, it is very US biased, but yeah, that will change over time. So plenty of opportunity though.
Excellent. Well, thank you all of you for that bit of insight into the investment. As I say, it's an area we don't always talk about enough, and thanks Lee for that question. It was really helpful. I've got two more questions. I'm going to try and cover these two questions and then we can finish. So we might go slightly over. We will go slightly over 5 o'clock, but as many of you as possible can hold on. That would be fantastic. So I've got a question from Jason Preston. Hi Jason, thanks for joining us. About great legal tech requirements and how they're surfaced. And Jason asked specifically about in firms, where do they come from? Who drives that creation of those requirements? But I'm going to ask Sarah Green to sort of deal with this one first, because Sarah, one of the things you said earlier on was, in terms of the Law Commission, most of my projects are around tech and the implications of new technology. So they're coming from somewhere. I'd be really interested to know where they come from, how they get driven, created before they reach the Law Commission. And then if I could, I'm going to ask Sean and then Antonia to answer that question from their firm's point of view as well. Sarah.
Chris, I heard what you said. I'm afraid I missed the original question because my dog chose just that moment to run in and is the ball growling.
That's now become traditional. So yes, I will repeat the question. I won't ask you to carry on without that. So the question is, how do you see great legal tech requirements being surfaced? And I was really interested in something you said earlier on, that at the Law Commission you're getting, most of my projects are around tech and the implications of new technology. So I'm just interested where they come from, as far as you can see, how they are getting created, surfaced. And who's driving that?
So our projects come from various sources on the whole. So we can take anything from a ministerial reference to suggestions from pretty much anybody who thinks that there's an area of law that we need to look at. So we're always in listening mode in that sense. But actually the emerging tech projects have almost all been from government. And I think that's interesting and also quite important for our project. So we can't take on a project at all. I'm sorry if you can still hear the dog, she's still going. But if I talk to her, she'll just pay more attention to me and not leave the room. So I'm just going to ignore her. We can't take on a project, or we won't take on a project unless government has a serious intention of at least considering the proposals that we take on. So actually, if we get a project from government in the first place, then obviously that's really good news for their enthusiasm for dealing with it. And the projects I'm thinking of in this area are smart contracts, digital assets, and electronic trade documents. So those are the three that I think there's a real impetus behind at the moment. And everybody I speak to from across the board, whether they're users, whether they're technology developers, whether they're legal advisors, all think that these are things that need to be looked at. And as I said, they've come from government, but they've come from government, I think, because government has been told by the legal sector and by the technology sector and by industry that this is what people want clarity and certainty on, and that's what there certainly isn't at the moment. And I think what's been interesting from my perspective as we've conducted these projects, I mean, I wouldn't want to suggest for a moment that I haven't got a lot of work to do, but actually it's not the work I expected to have to do. There are some real foundational questions about the real underpinnings of this technology. So that the very difficult thing, just to give you an example, is about how we treat, how property law treats digital assets. Can we have property in them, etc.? Now that's very difficult, but actually a lot of the day-to-day issues that we've been asked to look at, can we use smart contracts? Can we use electronic signatures? Can we execute deeds in a remote way? Apart from the last one, most of what we've done is to say, actually, this is already okay as a matter of law, and what really needs to happen is the users of those rules need to have a greater amount of confidence. They need to know that it is okay. So take electronic signatures as the example. There's still a huge amount. The Law Commission published a report in 2019 saying for most purposes electronic signatures absolutely fine, which shouldn't be surprising because of course there are all sorts of things that can constitute a signature. So just sort of doing an X, a mark as an X, or a poor mark or something, if you've got the right intention, then that can be enough. So we released this statement in 2019, but still in 2020, what are we now? 2021. There is still a huge amount of uncertainty and lack of confidence that these things actually are okay and should be used. So the work that I have been doing has been less about law reform and more about best practice and reassurance that these issues are already, to a surprising degree, okay as a matter of law. So I went a bit off topic there, but I think it's that was sort of by way of explanation that these three projects, and so those issues that I've just been talking about, have all come from government. And then the last one, which I said was the exception, which is deeds, remote witnessing. You know, what are we going to do about changing the way that we execute these kind of documents, which of course has been almost impossible throughout the pandemic, is something else that we have been asked to look at. And that again was from government. That was directly from the Lord Chancellor. So it's been very interesting to me that all of these emerging tech projects, as a result of tech products, have come from above, and that's quite unusual for a whole set of Law Commission projects to happen in that way.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. You didn't go off topic at all. I think that just underlines the amount of critical change there is. Although you've underlined the fact that it isn't about law reform as such in and around the legal technology space at the moment. And lots of people were nodding as you listed those 3 or 4 projects. We're all kind of thinking about that now. So it's a very universal issue. I'm going to bring it down to the firm level, and Sean and Antonia, quick responses. Sorry, for just give us an idea of where legal tech ideas and requirements come from and have come from in your firms. Sean.
It started off with it being lawyers coming up with ideas about something, let's do something with blockchain. And then you develop a solution and you go to clients, they'll be like, I don't even know where my contracts are. They're probably in a cupboard somewhere with a bike lock fastening it. So I don't really need blockchain and smart contracts. I need somewhere to store them electronically. And suddenly, suddenly there's that realization that it's all well and good coming up with really good ideas and really kind of, really inventive technology, where actually a lot of clients just need really simple fixes. And so that's where the technology that I'm most interested in at the moment is not the complex end. It's really sort of fixing those simple things. And I think that links in with what Sarah's saying, isn't it? It's that kind of, it's just doing the basics, getting the basics right, because I think we, as an industry, I don't think we're there, and I don't think our clients are there. They're getting there and they're understanding the need to do it. But that's where we're finding that sort of driver for technological change comes from. It's the client's basic needs.
Thank you. Antonia.
No surprise, I totally agree with Sean. I think the majority of our solutions have come from, we facilitate quite a lot of focus groups with groups of clients, and often we go in there with some really creative solutions and ideas that we've worked together with our lawyers in developing. And every time we've made assumptions incorrectly, and actually what they're looking for is far simpler than we could have imagined, and yet we've over-engineered it because we've got lots of big brains and lots of big skill sets there, overdoing it in a way. So I think listening to the client is essential. From our perspective, I think there's a strategy internally, and we run that through operational efficiency and client service delivery. And then there are tactics. So we've talked about skills academies. We have a new partner program. How can you disrupt your space as much as possible? Come up with the ideas. I think most of us have got sort of no idea is a bad idea cultures where you can drop in and you can put your hand up to learn a new skill and develop something. So I think it's being driven by those of us that are passionate about it, probably operationally, but we're being driven by our clients, I suspect.
Thank you. And again, great to hear everybody so much on that kind of keep it simple mantra as well. We're trying to move away from over engineering, and I know a number of you from conversations I've had with you both on the tech company supply side and all the parts of the industry would absolutely agree with that. It's been a really refreshing theme to see coming out. I have got one more big question from Wayne Perkins, and here's what Wayne's saying. I think we're going to talk about resourcing. I'll just finish off with this question about resourcing, which I think is a really big issue for us at the moment. With everything we've been saying about digital transformation, it's a necessity. It's growing all the time. The pandemic has accelerated it. I think you all agree with that point. Then resourcing of, Wayne describes it as critical IT projects, but it could be any of these IT technology innovation projects. It is becoming incredibly important, and there is a lot of demand, a lot of competition for engineers, software people, innovators. How is that manifesting itself at the moment, and how are we overcoming that? And I'm going to just ask really quick view on resourcing for those kind of roles. I'm going to ask Dave Bloor and Tom Bartley and Julia to give me a view on that from different parts of the industry. How much of an issue is resourcing now and looking forward, and are there any good solutions? Dave.
Yeah, okay. So it sort of goes back to Antonia and Sean's point earlier on. Actually, when I started in Fortancy 3 years ago, we had a bunch of great technical experts, but they were cables, wires, tin. None of them could have a conversation in a room with a client, understanding their problems. Over the last 3 years, we've entirely reversed that so that we don't really have what I call non-differentiating skill sets within a technology function. What we do have is differentiating skill sets, and they are, students that have finished their law degree and can have front-end development skills. I think the reality of a lot of technology that's used in the legal space is it's not hardcore coding unless you're creating your own integration layer to get the data to work. Actually, it's quite lightweight, low code, no code. So you can afford to teach people those skills. What you can't give them is the soft skills of that legal conversation, that legal rapport. And that's where we've really focused. And when you look at a lot of traditional transformation programs, you often hear that you've got your business analysts, your project managers, and those types of roles. Actually, what we call our legal engineers, they are the ones that go out. They have the time to work in a more all-rounded view with the client, with our legal teams, in identifying, what the requirement is, what the skills So what the requirement is, what the solution is the client's looking for, and then they sort of come back and go, actually, to deliver this is what I think we need. And what we're seeing time and time again is actually the development skills are quite mainstream, quite normal, front-end development, configuration. It's that ability to have the legal conversation with the client, with the fee earners, in doing that. And then also where there are some specialist areas, looking out to broader relationships, creating partnerships, something that Tom and I are discussing at the moment, ironically, around how that can work around AI, etc. So recognizing where you pull your specialist skills from versus the differentiating skills you need to have within the business to help drive that change agenda. I think get that right and you're onto a winner every time.
Fantastic. Nice cue for Tom there. And Tom, you and I were talking about the fact that law firms were finding a real challenge in resourcing some of these roles recently. How are you finding this? What do you see in the market?
So I think just to follow on from Dave, there are very different skill sets that are required. And when we talk about tech, the assumption is to go to development and to engineering, and quite frankly, finding engineering talent in the Southwest is really challenging at the moment. Particularly as we see the influx of, or the growth of companies out of London and acquiring talent across the country. So I think that the key thing is that Dave says there are lots of low code, no code solutions coming to the market. And actually when designing what the technology looks like, avoiding reinvention and reproduction of technologies that already exist, and actually just the adoption of technologies that are off the shelf, whether they're commercially or open source. And then the business analysis, the design thinking, the processes that go into what should we be doing are learnable. And actually they are solid skills that lawyers should be having anyway in their conversations with clients. They're solid skills that any professional should be developing as we think about the skills that are required. I don't know if it's one of the Gartner type things, but the skills that are required in the complex problem solving, design thinking, stakeholder engagement, soft people management skills, these are all things that professionals should be having, and they are learnable by anyone that's been through a technical training, whether that's legal or engineering or otherwise. And so I would kind of just separate those two things and look for off the shelf as much as possible, because that is the headache. That is the bit where the big risk and uncertainty lies anyway, and that's where the talent shortages mostly are.
Thank you. Julia, I think you're close to having the last word. Obviously, I will have the last word, but you're close to having the last word. Over to you on this point.
I really agree with everything Tom said. I think engineering talent and product and design talent, actually, there's a known shortage for the reasons that Tom mentioned. And I think it actually goes to the heart of, I think, law firms' decisions as well around buy versus build. I think it's something to think really carefully about, because retaining engineering talent is hard in general. And actually thinking really carefully about what is the core skill set of an organization versus outsourcing to sort of specialists is, I think, quite important. And the last thing I would say is just in general, from a tech company perspective versus a law firm perspective, I think in general retention, and especially retention of like millennial generation and people who are really interested in kind of having high value work, having meaningful work, having a mission, feeling like they're involved in strategic issues, and also understanding how things work, is really like a sea change more culturally. And I think thinking about how technology I really love Ben's comments earlier about, there's no technology solution for creating like a diverse, inclusive culture, or creating like a sense of belonging. I think there are opportunities to increase the meaningfulness of people's work through leveraging technology to remove some of the lower value work that we were discussing earlier. So it's a really interesting issue, I think, as we think about university students, as we think about retention of talent, whether it's in a tech company or in a law firm.
Thank you very much for tying that up beautifully. It's that time where I wrap up and thank everybody for their participation. Obviously, particularly our super panel, who turned out to be super on both dimensions as expected. So thank you everybody for joining. really appreciate giving up so much time and so many fantastic perspectives. It was fascinating. I've been writing a lot of stuff down on a piece of paper. Apologies for that. I can't type and do all these different screens at the same time. There have been some brilliant questions. Thank you, everybody, from the audience for your questions. And there's been some really good stuff on the chat as well, including some stuff about smart contracts. Thanks, everybody there. Really participative audience as far as we can do at these events. And thank you, Bristol Tech Festival, for allowing us to put on another LegalTech event, just showing how important a sector it is in the wider tech firmament. So enough thank yous. Well done, everybody. Hope it's whetted your appetite for future events. The next one, I am sure, will be a live event. But those of you who are joining from London and further reaches, we would very much love to see you down here for that. I look forward to it already. We'll let you know about that. Thanks for joining. Sorry we went a bit over. Hope you thought it was well worthwhile. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.